Welcome everyone to the workshop 5 of the Dynamic Coalition session, the capacity building. We know that without capacity building, there would be no digital economy. This is the core of what we do. And I'm very lucky to have a distinguished panel of experts representing Dynamic Coalitions with me. Dr. Mohammed Shabir from DCAD, Aiden Ferdin from Dynamic Coalition on Financial Inclusion, Janice Richardson, IS3C, Jutta Kroll from DC CRI, Avri Doria from DC Schools of Internet Governance, and Eleni Borsnew from OER DC. And we will have people joining us online. How we're going to conduct this session is, I'm going to set the context of why this is important, seek views of my expert panelists who have joined us, and we would want the people in the audience in the room also to ask us questions as we go forward. In my view, capacity building is as multidimensional as is digital economy. And it's not just about the technical skills, but also about mindset. It's about governance. It's about multidisciplinary collaboration. And so no better forum than a multi-stakeholder organization like IGF to discuss about it. And as I see the capacity building initiative needs across the continuum, one of the things that comes to mind is at the highest level of policy, the policymakers' capacity building, the governance, the workforce capacity building, institutional capacity building. So you will see many times that we have technical maturity. For anything that you need a technology solution, we have it. We do not have the organizational maturity to leverage that. So that's a huge divide as well. Then you have communities and users, and then people with special needs, and then you have media. So what we're going to do is to go across the expert panel and ask them their views on this topic first, and then we deep dive into this topic in detail. And in 30 minutes, I have a hard stop because I have to move to another panel. So my colleague, Janice Richardson, would be moderating the rest, and I'm sure it's in able hands. Let me start with the question of capacity building and what are your views around it. So I'll go from my right. Jutta, your views?
Yes, of course I have views. And although my focus is on children's rights, I will base my input today on a more broader human rights perspective. When we consider the human rights to non-discrimination, freedom of speech, access to information, the right to privacy, and the right to peaceful assembly and association, these are all examined in the digital space, and these rights oblige us to enable everybody to take part in the digital age. We are obliged to build people's capacities by providing them with skills and the competencies necessary for responsibly and safely navigating the digital environment. And my experiences in this regard date back to the turn of the millennium, when even in developed countries, less than 1/3 of the population had ever heard about the internet, let alone having access to digital services, which was then when the term digital divide was coined. And nowadays we are going to face a further digital divide. I would call that the digital literacy divide, which is even widened in course of the time. Eventually, we need to keep in mind that lessons we are teaching today to address this literacy divide, they will be outdated tomorrow, though we really need, in capacity building, we need to keep pace and to be up to date. I've just been attending a session on AI literacy, and I will get back to capacity building in regard of AI and also in regard of a potential digital AI divide. Thank you.
Thank you. Jutta, you made a very important point of the human rights perspective and how the digital divide is aggravating rather than, alleviating. And this brings me to Avri, who represents Schools of Internet Governance. Avri, what's your take on this and how are you going to address this issue going forward?
Thank you. I think it's actually an interesting question, on the human right. It's something that even before we had any good conceptions of there being human rights, innumerable human rights, we knew that children had to be educated. We knew that people had to have schools. And so while I think there are many dimensions to the notion of capacity building, both in the creation of knowledge and the dispersing of knowledge, given that my role here is to talk about the schools, I'll sort of focus on those, though without all the other capabilities that sort of create the knowledge we teach, the schools would be useless. Within something, whether it's a new area or a long existing area with new people getting involved in it, there's always the need to organize that knowledge and to organize the teaching of it. Now, often the teachers in the schools don't assume that they're doing it within something that is a human right, and as I am here as a teacher to fulfill the human right of the students, that is really the case. So when I looked at, internet governance and data governance and all those things, yes, everyone could go and be autodidactic and read the books and teach themselves, and that could work, but it doesn't happen. And therefore, you really do need people that have experience in the subjects to actually work with the newer folk, whether they're young and new or even old and new, to figure out how to teach them about the subject area, how to bring it, how to make it. But it goes even further in the schools for internet governance. For example, doing an IGF, doing a multi-stakeholder process, participating in a multi-stakeholder process is something that is foreign to most all of us before we step foot in a multi-stakeholder environment. So schools need to also teach sort of what I'd call the practicum of how do you do it. Just like when I was working on a degree in counseling, I had to do practicum counseling under supervision just so I would know the how to do it. So when we're talking about capacity building, we're talking not only about the knowledge, but the capability to actually do. I guess I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Avery, for bringing this important point. It's not just about knowledge, it's about capability and capacity. Coming to Janice. Janice, you have been working in this field for decades. How do you see this area of capacity building in the future, and how do we address it?
So first of all, I am representing here the IS3C Internet Standards, Safety and Security, and I think standards are important because they do also translate into ethics. I've listened to my colleagues, but I think there's one really important element that we haven't discussed so far, and that is not just capacity building to do things, but capacity building to understand the impact that technology is having on our life, how it's shaping our attitude, how it's changing the way we really think. And we've seen this in elections all over the world. If people really understood the impact of technology on the decisions that they're making, if we understood how the algorithms are giving me information from one side but not from the other, I think then we can really start talking about people being capable of using technology effectively. I wouldn't talk about a digital divide. I think it's more a societal divide. And I think that it's the technology that has pushed us towards the societal divide. Those who really can rise above what they see online, analyze it, and take a distance from it, and those who are pushed around by technology. And I think that's a very big difference. And we do need to talk about this from the very earliest age. We're putting kids in front of screens, we're changing the plasticity of their brain, and so capacity building also has to take a much more, I would say a much broader approach and really understand what's happening to society. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Janice. And you made this important point that it's not just a digital divide, it's a societal divide, it's a social divide. And this brings me back to connecting the dots, what Yuta said, what Avri said. And what you finally alluded to is that this is a world where we have to take everyone along to make sure that this societal divide doesn't happen. This brings me to Dr. Mohammed Shabir from the the Dynamic Coalition on Disabilities. Dr. Shabir, how do you see this, and how do you see that we should be addressing, given the work that you've been doing in your Dynamic Coalition?
Thank you very much, Rajendra, and thank you very much to my colleagues who have spoken before me. I thank them for making my job a little bit more easier. But I take a little bit of a different view from the perspective of DCAD in terms of capacity building. Persons with disabilities are considered to be the largest minority on earth. And unfortunately, when it comes to their participation in IG discussions, their number can be counted on fingers, and we still have some fingers left if we start doing that. What does this mean? This means that in 20 years of IGF discussions, though you would find that every IGF has had sessions and discussions on persons with disabilities, about persons with disabilities. I myself have participated in about 5 of, this is my 5th IGF out of 20. So 25% of the IGF I participated in. But there are very few who participate, and then this raises a question. Are we building the capacities in the right manner, or do we need to do something else? Is it the question of just capacity, or there is something else which is required? In my understanding, capacity building is not just required from the user side or the participant sides to participate, enable them to participate in the IGF discussions. But it is also required on the organizer's side, as well as one of my earlier colleagues talked about knowledge creation. So on the side of the person who is creating and producing the knowledge in a way where it is made accessible for people who access the knowledge in a different manner. So the question that those knowledge producers need to ask themselves is whether that knowledge would be accessible to those persons with disabilities or not. And lastly, the point I want to make in my initial intervention is that the disability is a transnational, transgender, transgeographic, transracial subject. It can catch anyone and everyone at a time when we least expect it. And it's not by choice, it's by design. So everyone working in the places of decision making, be that knowledge production, be that capacity building, or website production, or whatever else, they need to think whether can I make this accessible? If not, then sometime, someday, you yourself might need it and may find it inaccessible for yourself. I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabir. And you made this important point about knowledge being accessible or not. Now, this brings me to a very important point that we are talking of capacity building, and we're living in a digital era. So everything from financial products to education to health, everything has moved digital. This brings me to Aidan, who represents the Dynamic Coalition on Financial Inclusion. Aidan, given the fact that the financial markets, the financial world also is moving digital, currencies are moving digital, are we really touching anything on financial inclusion? Where we stand today, what's your view, and what are we doing on that? And what's the way forward? Sorry for a longish question.
I welcome the longest question. Thank you for that important question. And thank you as well to my colleagues on the stage here for your earlier contributions today. As you mentioned, I'm here to represent the Dynamic Coalition on Digital Financial Inclusion. And when we began our work last year, one of our members, the Interledger Foundation, conducted some thought leadership to map whether financial rights even were human rights. And that was one of the conversations that we've had to have ourselves to really understand, because there is not per se a human right to finance, from what human rights do financial rights derive? And for us, it became clear that financial rights derive from and enable rights including the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to social protection, the right to work and to economic participation, and in digital context, the right to non-discrimination, to data protection and privacy, though privacy is not always a human right, and access to financial services. And to also really link back to the question that you're asking around capacity building, we have come to believe that to be able to meaningfully exercise these rights, individuals do need to have the capability to access and to use financial systems, especially as these systems become digitized. And even if the individual themselves is not digitally participating in systems, these systems are digital and they are impacting people, whether they use them in an electronic form or not. So even someone who is using, for lack of a better word, analog financial services is in some way being impacted by digital financial services, because the likelihood is that the financial service provider is in some way using electronic systems. And so in that way, digital financial inclusion is not just a technical or a development issue, but it is clearly a fundamental right. And so when we speak about capacities and competencies that are required for our digital future, we think that we need to begin by recognizing that digital participation is no longer optional. It is foundational to realizing human rights. It is happening to you whether you opt to participate or not. And we think that it's one of the most overlooked yet essential components of participation, that ability to access, to use, to control financial services. And really, when we're talking about the ability of individuals to exercise agency, when we're talking about the ability to be able to make meaningful choices in an increasingly digitized society, that does include the ability to transact, to save, to borrow, to be able to participate in economic life. Because without these capacities, the other rights that I've heard people on the stage identify, the right to education, the right to health, the right to have services as an individual who requires services, and even the right to political participation are undermined. And so to answer the question at a high but unhelpful level, yes, we do need capacity building because we do need agency to be able to ensure that more and more people are able to participate in today's digital society. But these issues are very much cross-cutting, and we cannot merely address financial inclusion alone. We have to work in tandem with everyone else on this stage to try to bring together a better path forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Aidan. And I believe that we have Eleni online. Can we hear your views on this, please, Eleni?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, perfectly.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the floor. I'm very pleased to share some reflections from the OER Dynamic Coalition on how OER can help build more inclusive knowledge societies. So the 2019 UNESCO recommendation places equity, inclusion, and accessibility at the heart of its vision, because OER are not only tools for access, they are also instruments for participation, empowerment, and rights realization. As Yuta said in her contribution, she talked about the need of the critical need of digital literacy. OER can play a huge role in ensuring that everyone has the tools and the right to learn and contribute to knowledge creation. So to achieve this, we must go further than basic ICT skills. The OER recommendation emphasizes the need for critical digital literacy, so users can confidently share and adapt resources. Then including how to evaluate online information and AI systems. Then everything that goes with open licensing literacy. Third, a rights-based understanding of digital engagement, including privacy and non-discrimination. And fourth, assistive technology skills for learners with disabilities. And these competencies are foundational for inclusive digital development as outlined in the Global Digital Compact. Lack of digital capacity is itself a form of discrimination. The OER recommendation section area 3 calls for inclusive, well-resourced capacity building so that all stakeholders, especially those in vulnerable situations, can participate meaningfully. So we work with, as OERDC, we work with member states, with teachers, with schools, but also in the decision-making level and in the policy development level. And we hope that we are creating impact, because we need agile and inclusive OER ecosystems as a whole. So I'll finish with that for now.
And thank you, Eleni. We've discussed then many, I would almost say, gaps in our capacity building. We've gone from rights with Jutta, the importance of schools and teaching, from Dr. Shabir, the importance of integrating, of adapting, but of making sure that equality exists for the many people in the world who need that little bit of extra help. From Aidan, we talked about finance, and finally from Alan, and sorry, I've broken that down very much. I would say capacity and understanding agency in the economic world. And of course, the importance of open educational resources from Melanie. Now I'm going to open the floor to questions, and I don't quite know how it works. No one told me. I believe there's a microphone there. Yes, would you mind lining up if you have a question at the microphone so that we can hear what your questions are? We really want this to be a very interactive debate. Do we have any proposals of what's missing, what we should be thinking about when we're talking about capacity building? And then we'll come back to the panel shortly. Could you introduce yourself first, please?
Hello, my name, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Gunilla Estbrink, training coordinator with the Internet Society Accessibility Standing Group. And I was interested in both Avridorius and Eleni's comments, and of course Dr. Shabir. I'm very interested in the Global Digital Compact, and there is quite an extensive clause there on digital literacy and capacity building. And it also includes about accessible interfaces for persons with disabilities. So it's of great interest to us. I'm wondering, how do we get those clauses from the GDC and implement them in member states? It's a challenging one with WSIS plus 20 and trying to drill it down. Are there any processes that the panel can suggest? I know there are a lot of discussions ongoing, but I'm interested in your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. So I'm going to turn to the panel. Is there anyone who'd especially like to take this question? Yes, please, Avri.
I'll start. I guess there's two things in your question. One is we can't count on just governments to do it. So the notion of how do we get governments to do it, yes, this is an important one. The government should probably do it, but that's sort of might happen, might not happen. It depends on politics, government priorities. But how do you get it done in any case by any of those with the potentials to do it? And it requires one of the things that's almost always missing, other than the will, and that's the funding. educating people never, ever, ever comes for free. Not only do you have to pay teachers, but you have to have materials. You have to spend time developing methodologies, developing methods. If you need assistive, technology, that costs. So there's almost no education other than, the old Socratics sitting under a tree and giving a lecture that can be done for free. And even then you have to feed poor Socrates. But so that is almost always, and it is very interesting about capacity building. It's not only the GDC, but every single one of the documents from the time of the Tunis Agenda and the plan and all that has cried out for capacity building in development areas, capacity building in skills that are needed, capacity building in allowing those that have problems, have issues, have trouble learning, have trouble reading, every one of those needs to be done, and yet never ever have they ever said, and we're going to dedicate a certain amount of resource to building the skills, educating the teachers, and then putting in plans. And so I guess it's a long way of saying, I don't have the faintest idea unless they figure out that they are going to put themselves behind funding it. Because without funding, there are no teachers, there is no assistant, there are no schools.
Thank you, and I think that's sort of the crux of the matter. Where, who, how do we build this capacity? Jutta has asked for the floor.
Yes, I wanted to refer to the UN Convention on People with Disabilities and also on children, on the rights of children. And what we did 4 years ago with the General Comment on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment emphasizes that children's rights to education and also the rights of children with disabilities need to be adapted to the digital environment. So we need to understand that there are already rights that need kind of a further interpretation how to do that. But going to your question back with regard to the governments, all those governments who have ratified the conventions are obliged to adhere to what they have ratified. So it's kind of, we need to take them accountable, to hold them accountable, saying, yes, you have ratified, so now we need the action. You need to do something because you have ratified the convention, and especially because it's my head on children's rights advocate, I would say we have kind of a rule book with the General Comment number 25 that the governments can be held accountable for. Thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. But I do have one little further question. How do you hold them accountable? I mean, what can you do to actually force them to take this into consideration, to do something about it?
Yes. So our strategy usually is, of course, we are talking to the government, and they have to have these reports on a regular basis where they have to report back what they have done for the implementation of the convention and also for the implementation of general comments. But on the other hand, we're also going, for example, to the schools, to the educational area, saying, if you don't feel confident what you are going to do in regard of certain types of education, of capacity building, then have a look and then go to your government. Say, yes, we need to get the money because you have ratified these conventions. So it's vice versa. We have to put a little pressure, but we can hold them accountable based on the convention and the comments.
Thank you. And I think that's really something we should follow up. Dr. Shabir, you asked for the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Ganela, for this question. And from your question, I take two key points. One is the capacity building in education, and the second is accessibility of the platforms. With regards to capacity building, of persons with disabilities and what is written in the GDC and other instruments. We have discussed this. And the only example I would give here, and I would relate that with the implementation of GDC and my earlier comments, is the CRPD that Yuta just mentioned, United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I don't know the exact number, but what I'm sure of is that out of 93 UN member states, over 180 have signed and ratified this convention. But in some states, its implementation is wonderful, while others lack in its implementation. When the states where it is wonderful is because of two reasons. One, because there was strong advocacy, and two, they had strong systems. Because once you commit to something, you have to implement it. And on the other hand, on the second stage, they had very strong advocacy from within, where the people with disabilities, they themselves came forward and have their governments implement the CRPD. Similarly, coming to the GDC and accessibility of the platforms and capacity building, perhaps we can start by bringing more people with disabilities into IGF discussions. DCAD is doing both things, building capacity and bringing persons with disabilities. But it is working at the global level. We need people coming from the grassroots levels, which would be national and regional internet governance forums and school on internet governances. And perhaps our fellow DC could contribute in that aspect. There are a couple, I can give examples, but for the fear of taking more time, I would just illustrate that DCAD since 2023 has been able to bring at least a couple of fellows to these discussions and have them participate in the IGF at the global level. But having 2 or 3 persons with disabilities where thousands, 3, 4, or at least 6,000 participants are participating in person or online is not just the peanuts. It's even less than that. So we need, as someone earlier said, we need more finances if we want more voices of persons with disabilities. With regards to accessibility of platforms, this is second thing, and it can come with low costs as well. But there, I would have to say, unfortunately, we also need, as I said in the beginning, we need the capacity building of the institutions and organizations. In 20 years of IGF's existence, still we find certain inaccessibilities with the IGF platforms and its websites. So it does not just mean that there is lack of capacity amongst those who do not know about accessibility, but there is something else which I don't want to name the lack of willingness, because that would be too much a strong word, but I don't have any other expression to use for that. And I stop there.
And thank you very much. I think that you've really put the ball in our court. Aidan, can I ask what you think about this question?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to respond. And I echo all of the comments from my colleagues earlier. I would say that if we think about what leverage we have or what other mechanisms might exist in order to see the good clauses of the Global Digital Compact materialize in ways that we can see and benefit people with disabilities. So obviously, implementation does require political will, and it would be perfect if political will was there. But where does political will come from? Political will comes from collaboration and pressure that is put on from different actors who work together and form coalitions to put that pressure onto government. So one instrument that we have is to name and shame. Civil society, for example, could have a scorecard that is evaluating how the national translation of the GDC into national law is weighing up, and if it's not measuring up, then that is good to know. So we can leverage peer pressure, soft power, enforcement by reputation can drive reform when visibility is at stake. You can also, as I can't remember, I believe it was Yuta might have mentioned this, but tying funding as well. And it doesn't just need to be, it can also be funding from private philanthropy, from donors, from development banks. They can become enforcers by conditionality. We can advocate that digital public infrastructure grants, for example, must adhere to certain norms within the GDC, whether that's open standards, human rights impact assessments, inclusive access. I'm not an expert on the Global Digital Compact. I'm sure there are many other great pieces that we could draw upon to tie into the different private funding that is made available. But we can also build parallel infrastructure that upholds the best parts of the Global Digital Compact as well. And certainly something within the Dynamic Coalition on Digital Financial Inclusion that we have been supporting for is that we think when enforcement through state channels fails repeatedly, when there are vested interests that prevent there from being better infrastructure that materializes, we can build alternatives. We can support open source, rights-based digital public goods. We can use decentralized or federated architecture. We can pilot different models that can scale and influence policy from the bottom up. So just putting out some other ideas on the table that innovation can also be a form of enforcement. We can demonstrate what is possible. We can shame what is not possible. And we can also bring in new actors to this space and to others to have those conversations and to sort of make the case for why the good parts of the Global Digital Compact, you have a responsibility to take forward as well. It is not enough to expect states to be enforcing the Global Digital Compact. They should, but it is also reasonable to make the argument to other actors, including in the private sector and in philanthropy, that maybe someone else was carrying excess weight in the past. It's your turn to step up. Thanks.
So we've got a lot of great ideas. I wonder when these dynamic coalitions can work together to help implement them. And I'm turning now to Eleni. Eleni, did you have anything to respond on this question? I know that there's one person waiting to ask a new question. Eleni.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Janice. I just want to say that I echo what my colleague said. And I also want to say that it's not only about funding, at least about OER. I can say from our experience, it needs to be, in order to have inclusive OER ecosystems, we need to have backup by institutional frameworks, funding and standards. What I say, open standards, ensuring that OER are integrated into lifelong learning and accessible to all. So also what my colleague said is very, very important, that in order to have inclusive digital public infrastructure, it's not just a right, it's both a right and a shared responsibility. And we have this responsibility as dynamic coalitions to do more and advocate more, because that's what we do. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. And we have a new question. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Janice. I think I'm going to take it out for a while. My name is Wouter Natris, and I represent the DC on Internet Standard Security and Safety. Where capacity building is concerned, I notice that it's very hard to get the attention and the funding to continue the research work that has been done and translate that into some sort of capacity building. So I have the idea that some of the people sitting here have a good experience with the capacity building. So what is your experience that you could share with other DCs? But the second is the IGF structured in such a way that we can easily translate the work that all the DCs, there are 32 of them, do into some sort of actions. So should the IGF be organized in a different way from 2026 onwards to make it easier to share the messages coming out of your DCs and the others? Thank you.
Thank you, Wow. So I think, crudely put, how do we actually put into action what we're all talking about? Is this a talk shop, or can we really lead forward and take action. Do anyone on the panel want to intervene on this, or is there someone in the audience who would like to respond? Where does that money come from for the research that's really necessary if we're going to customize the capacity building for the different population sectors and challenges? Yes, Jutta.
I don't can tell where the money does come from, but I don't think it's only a question of funding. It's the question of whether we are quick enough. The whole landscape that we need these capacities for is rapidly evolving due to the technical developments and the innovations. So we are always a little bit, or maybe a big step behind these developments. So when we are going for funding, that takes time. Then we get the funding, we do the research, and what we want to research is maybe just a step ahead. So we really need to have a kind of quicker strategies to address these issues, to not be lagging behind with our educational strategies, with our curricula, for example. We need to adapt that to the technology. And my idea would be that somehow Dr. Shabir has already addressed those who are developing services, who are developing technologies. They should also consider from the beginning what capacities, what skills, what competencies would people need when they use these services. So not that we are stepping behind that and then develop a curriculum for a technology that was there for a time, or having in between research, how do we address these competencies, the trainings, the curricula in schools. It needs to go in parallel, because otherwise we are just not quick enough in these innovative times.
And I think there you've really put the finger on a problem that we suffer a lot in Europe. The European Commission does provide budgets with programs such as Horizons, but you have to put in your proposal a year before, and by the time you've got the money, the issue has passed and something new's on the scene. I believe that Avri wanted to say something. Am I right? No? Okay. I'm going to turn back to Dr. Shabir, who would like to ask a question of his own to the audience.
And we have another question.
An online question.
Online?
Oh, sorry.
Do we have? Okay.
We'll have an online question when we've heard the question from Dr. Shabir.
No, I think we can do that. I can hold back my questions because I have spoken enough. So I
Okay.
can give chance to other people to speak.
Thank you, please.
So we have an online question from Emmanuel O'Rourke from Uganda. He's one of our online fellows, and he asks about reporting on the convention. On the convention, I guess he's talking about the convention, the CPRD. He says that sometimes they don't reflect what's actually the reality, and he was wondering whether multilateral agencies conduct M&Es on the cases that they've looked at, especially statistics, and does it match the impact of what they expect to see on the ground? And so, does anyone have an answer to his question?
So does anyone have an answer? Is there anyone in the public who has an answer? Reporting, it's so important. We can report, but does it always match the reality? Is there anyone with a response on this one? I think he's raised a very difficult question that we all need to think about. Is there anyone in the public who would like to respond to this question? Anyone here? Yes, Jutta.
I just can give an example also from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that is we have this regular-based state reports that are done by the government, and usually that takes a lot of time till they have compiled all the information that has to go into the report, giving the state of the art of the implementation of the convention. But there is also the additional report, is it called the alternative report, Torsten? the shadow report. That is done usually by civil society organizations. And due to the fact that they don't have these administrative hurdles, this can be a bit quicker and can give a more closer to the reality situation state-of-the-art report. So it's good to have these shadow reports as well. I don't know whether they exist also for the UN Convention on People with Disabilities, but that is a good option.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jutta. And
So
yes, I think we have a response. Larry, go ahead.
I can't hear myself. I assume you can hear me.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, I think that I can't remember the exact article of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which provides for participation and access to media. It is routinely violated by many, many countries, including European countries. The United States hasn't signed it, but all of these laws that are banning social media for people under 16 or restricting social media or putting in surveillance, all of which violate that article. So I would say that that's a great aspiration, but largely ignored by many of the member states.
So thank you. We got an answer, but yes.
Larry, we are going to put that in the shadow report, definitely, that we don't think that the social media bans are in line with Article 17. Thank you.
Dr. Shabir, over to you.
okay, thank you very much. Well, the question that I have from my fellow DC representatives is well, we can discuss this tomorrow, but certainly this comes in the way of capacity building as well. This is very important year, we all know, with all the WSIS 20 plus review and all of those things, feature of IGF. So have we had the capacities built to prepare ourselves of what is coming next?
Is there anyone on the panel? I think I'll turn to Avri. Maybe you have an idea on this.
Yeah, you saw me shake my head. And I fear I'm being a fairly pessimistic person in this session. And obviously the only bright spot I ever see is philanthropy, is NGOs that manage to do it. It is the big companies that decide that they are going to fund, and certainly we have funding there. But by and large, I'm not even sure we're ready for what we have. And so, you know, while we're still at a point of trying to figure out what is to come, it's not like there's ever a parallel process on we are inventing X. How do we put X into the ether, into the open zone in a safe manner? It's not, I mean, so perhaps that's something that needs to start. We need to sort of invent our capacity for dealing with something as we are inventing the something. But we can't even get people to test things for safety. We can't even get people to do, you know, design in that sort of stuff as things are going on. So again, my pessimism says, great idea, but how do we convince anybody to do it? And I don't think, I happen to not be one of the ones that supports making laws that to do things like that, because we always find ways around laws. And whenever we make a law, we just find new ways of creating more law enforcement and cleverer ways to get around them. So how do we do it? By convincing people, and that comes back to capacity, but how do I build your capacity to build something in a moral way, in a safe way? And we're not even thinking about that, but perhaps that's what we should start, is raising the capacity of the inventors, of the engineers, of the others, to think of it in terms of how it will be used, how it will be safe, etc. But I really don't know. I just don't.
Yes, thank you. You put it out there. Does anyone else want to respond to this? Aidan, did you have anything you wanted to say, or you're fine?
I am fine. I don't have a good response to that. I mean, what I really think about when it comes to capacity building is who trains the trainer, and those kind of questions, because we have just, as our Dynamic Coalition on Digital Financial Inclusion, put together a policy blueprint. But if you read it, it's really just a series of questions for other people to answer, because the reality is that some of these issues are really difficult to respond to and very contextual. And when I think about any evolving process, be it WSIS plus 20, the Global Digital Compact, I mean, we don't know what we don't know just yet. So it's difficult to think through what a structured capacity building program would look like. Because there was an earlier question around how should the IGF structure perhaps be reformed to be a little more fit for purpose. I mean, I would love to have been able to respond to say we could create a dedicated track for exploring financial inclusion and financial rights, and we could have workshops and knowledge repositories and toolkits on building rights-based digital payments and financial consumer protection in the digital age, and digital literacy as a financial right and implementation guidance. But the reality is we just have literally 10 pages of questions for other people to help us answer, and we are seeking input. But the reality is we have also consulted subject matter experts, and the problem is that if some of these problems could be solved more simply, they would have been solved a long time ago. So when I think about capacity building, I agree that it's important. I agree that we should do it. I think we need to give capacity building a very structured home in all of our processes. But I also fear that it's not so easy to operationalize.
Thank you. And would Eleni like to come in on this? No response.
Hello, Jenny. Yes.
Yes.
I don't have any comments on this.
Right. Is there any questions online?
No.
No. Dr. Gupta asked me a specific question. He would like to know, how do we change mindsets? According to him, and I think many of us agree, it's the mindset. People don't understand the importance of capacity building, which may be why it's not sufficiently funded. So I'm going to ask you all this question. How do we change the mindset so that people really understand the importance of capacity building, and therefore we can do our research, we can fund our research, we can structure? How do we change mindsets? And from the audience also, if you have something to say, please go to the microphone. Yes, Jutta.
Yes, I would say, first of all, we need to understand, I don't think we have all the same mindset. We have cultural differences in regard of the mindset of capacity building. We have differences across the globe, what the mindset is towards capacity building. We have different educational infrastructures. We have different situations in regard of train the trainer, what Aidan has brought up. So I don't think we can have a strategy to change the mindset in a way that works everywhere around the globe. What brought to my mind the reference to the train the trainers is we also need to discuss whether we have quality standards for training the trainers. When we maybe we have come a step further with defining what capacities, what skills, what competencies we are talking about, but we have not been talking about what quality standards we would have for these trainings. And if the trainers don't have the same quality standards, probably all these educated people, if we have them, then would not have got the same quality of education. And what we see with so many platforms where content is provided, where even how do you call it, like trainings, online training courses are provided, no one has oversight whether these are really of quality and train the right skills that people need for a certain service. So I do think we need to put more attention also in this regard. to make sure that we have quality standards in place, so that I don't just take a course and afterwards it's not worth having invested the time.
And do you think, I mean, who it should be, where is the big problem with the mindset? Is it with the policymakers? Is it with the workforce? Is it with the media? Is it with the institutions, or simply with the communities? So when you respond, if you could also think about who is responsible for having the current mindset. Yeah.
And I think it also depends on who it is that we're offering the capacity building training to, as well as who should be really the recipient of that capacity building training. Because if I look within our Dynamic Coalition on Digital Financial Inclusion, some of our members are financial institutions who probably already appreciate in some circumstances that capacity building is a risk mitigation strategy. So they would understand that for people in certain roles, with poorly trained compliance officers, you're going to have some pretty significant failures and regulatory risks. And so capacity gaps can be understood in that sense. When we think, though, about who probably should be the recipients of some capacity building, it might be more around does someone understand really the terms of a financial service that they've signed up to? Do they have recourse when automated decisions go wrong? Are they protected from discriminatory algorithms? Do they have the connectivity or the identification or the confidence that is needed to use a financial service or product? And so there's two different things here. There is the implications for the end user, the historically excluded communities, and those who have the most to lose potentially from lack of capacity building. And then there are the capacity building that can be offered as an argument that it is a risk mitigation strategy. So who is it that is receiving the training and who should receive the training? Because then the arguments around who is responsible are different and the incentives are different. Because obviously for some cases, the economic case can be made very powerfully. For others, well, maybe we need to quantify the gap and benchmark progress in order to understand why certain individuals are being harmed and why we may have an obligation for other actors to step forward to offer some assistance.
So if I understand from Aidan, there are many mindsets, well, from both of you, there are many mindsets, and the approach must be different for each. Can I call on you now, please, Dr. Shabir?
Yes. So I would just echo the statements that my colleagues made. And I would substantiate with the examples that in the disability field, and what is the motto of DCAD fellowship program is that we do not set any limitations on the fellowship. Of course, we cannot provide moon or business class tickets if they are required, but certainly within reasonable limits, we try to meet the individual's needs. So each individual as human have different requirements and needs. We can apply the case study as with the person with disabilities, since they have different needs. So those needs have to be met when you want to make the system or policy or platform accessible. Same is the case with the capacity building. You cannot have set checkboxes, or if you want to make a list, it would be a long one that would give you some indicators that who, when, and where to target. For instance, there are a number of capacity building online courses that train people with regards to different aspects of the internet governance. Many of the organizations run those courses. But if you do an accessibility audit of those online courses from the perspective of people with disabilities, There are very few, and I am using the word very because I don't have any other word to use that, where you would find no accessibility issues. So it would mean in other way that those courses, online courses, capacity building, which could have been easier, less costly, and less cumbersome for people with disabilities to follow and to learn from, right from their places of their convenience, you made them inaccessible for them. So platforms need to be made accessible. Internet Society's one course, Disability Leadership in Internet Governance, is one example. And that organization is trying to meet the needs and make the course accessible for people with disabilities. The next question comes that how do you market that product, that there is this course available that people with disabilities need to take? And it's not just that you have the capacity building course, and if you do not have the right learners learning that course, doing capacity building, who would you build that capacity for?
So if I understand from what you're saying, Dr. Shabir, we first of all need to change the mindset towards disabilities, and then perhaps we'll make progress. I'm going to call on Eleni, and here's a little warning, Avri, you're going to be next. Eleni, do you have anything to add here?
Yes,
What
I can tell
mindset are we going to change?
Yes. My experience from the OER coalition is that we need to start from the decision-making and policy-making level to make them understand why it is important and give some institutional framework that will provide incentives to the trainers that will use OER so that they will do it and it will be part of their professional development and they will have reasons to be implicated in the process and in the knowledge creation process. And also what I wanted to say is another challenge that is coming up in the AI era is the quality assurance mechanisms and how do we make sure that what we find online, the course is a quality course or not. And there, the challenges are great, and we are working on it. We are doing research on it, but we don't have still very concrete solutions.
Thank you. And Avri, the mindset in education is extremely important. It's very difficult to move along. What have you got to tell us on this point?
Okay. So I think when I look at the problem on the large scale is when I find myself getting pessimistic, because we have to change the mindset. You know, you asked whose mindset it's society's. It's not any particular person. It's not any particular group. I tend to find that capacity building, when it works, is done piecemeal by the devoted. In other words, you plunk down a school, you start a program, you write, you write something, and then you find out about the standards you need to meet. That each one of those is an individual or a small group of people that decide to do something. Those things work, those things multiply, those things become examples to others. So whenever I start sitting in one of these and looking at, from a large scale, how can we do it? It seems an intractable problem. But when you start looking at the problem in the small steps, the what step can each of us take, the what step can our group of educators take, from what steps can et cetera take, then it starts to be tractable. I have to drink some water so I can speak. But basically, that strikes me as kind of the only way forward, is sort of to keep selling it, keep preaching it, keep talking about it, etc., One person decides to go out and start a school. One person decides to take their website and make it accessible. One person writes a story about something that appeals to others. That kind of movement seems possible. The movement from the individual on out, the bottom up on out. But whenever I look for a large-scale solution, that's when despair starts to descend on me.
So perhaps what we do need is find a way to scale up these grassroots projects to make them more visible.
Or at least get more of them to happen.
That also. Is there anyone in the public who would like to talk about what mindset do we need to change? How do we go about this change so that we all believe that capacity building is important and can change society? We have no takers from the audience? No more questions?
No.
Is there anyone online who would like to add a word?
No.
So,
We have 8 minutes left.
yes, certainly. What I'm going to ask you to do now is give us some final words, but something really impactful that will start leading us towards something new, towards the progress that we're looking for between our dynamic coalitions to move forward with capacity building, perhaps together and perhaps individually. Who would like to start? Just 1 or 2 minutes about your final thoughts on this session. We can also start with Eleni, if you wish.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Janice. I'm adding my video. Yes, thank you. So we are working on capacity building, and we really hope that we will continue bringing OER in the heart of inclusive ecosystems. And we are very much motivated to work with all the dynamic coalitions on continuing bringing together all the elements that will make SDGs a reality. And thank you for giving me the floor and the opportunity to be with you online today.
Thank you, and thank you also for mentioning the SDGs, which we hadn't really mentioned, but I think that it underpins everything we're talking about with capacity building. Aidan, can I turn to you first, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the floor. So in human rights law, states have positive obligations not only to refrain from violating human rights, but to actively create the conditions in which rights can be realized. And through our Dynamic Coalition, the Dynamic Coalition on Digital Financial Inclusion, we've been saying that the same now has to apply to digital financial inclusion. We see that interoperable, open digital payment systems are infrastructure for human development, and we advocate for a shift in mindset. We think that we shouldn't see financial inclusion as charity or development aid or corporate social responsibility. It can be all of those things, but it's also a right, the right to be able to participate in the right to economic participation. And so welcome you to take a look at our policy blueprint and to offer us feedback on it so that we can help improve it. We believe that financial inclusion does intersect with many of the issues that everyone else is working on, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is accessibility, whether it is gender-related issues, whether it's digital identity. And I'm just going to throw it out there. We're very open to forming a cross-dynamic coalition on digital financial inclusion, but you're also more than welcome to join in to participate in our existing dynamic coalition as well. Because ultimately, if we all want a digital future that is equitable, that is empowering, and is just, we need to build competencies that are rooted in rights, and we need to design systems that measure up those rights. Because we think digital finance is not just a tool, but a lifeline. And so we would love to break down silos, integrate digital financial inclusion into the agendas and the work plans of other works, and to have a productive and long tenure here at the IGF.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Dr. Shabir, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much. I would just say that the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability is trying to do in its capacity to build capacity of people with disabilities, and not just people with disabilities, but also the IGF system to make those systems accessible and inclusive for all, so that people with disabilities can also contribute in the system meaningfully. Now, changing the mindset is one thing, but we start from the low-hanging fruit, where we try to bring people with disabilities to the discussions through a capacity building training program. We just do not bring them here and leave them, throw them in the pond to swim by themselves. We provide them with a mentor along with an online training program first. We also have for the system guidelines which were updated back in 2024 to make the meetings accessible for people with disabilities. UN Secretariat, the IGF Secretariat benefits from those guidelines, but it does picks and chooses, or the guidelines of convenience sometimes, as I am fond of saying. Those guidelines are there to make the event accessible, so it should not be pick and choose that what is convenient. If it has to be that, and if there are any financial constraints on implementing all of those guidelines, then there should be a discussion that what should be prioritized in the case of making the event accessible for people with disabilities. Without asking them first, making the decision is not the right approach. Lastly, I would say yesterday we had a session on the beyond tokenism. That was something where we talked about having persons with disabilities in the future leadership spaces. And this is where the takeaways of that sessions comes in. People with disabilities should not just be participating, but they should be making the decisions, because nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you. Jutta, some last words?
Yes,
In 1 minute.
I'm convinced capacity building is a precondition to benefit from the digital environment. Nonetheless, having said that, my key takeaway from this session is let's not try to adapt people to the service by training them to cope with the insufficiently designed services, which are not designed for their needs, but adapt the service to the people. And this counts, and that I've already also learned in this session, counts for all users, for children as well as for people with disabilities. We have services that are just not adapted to the needs of children, and now we are trying to ban them from these services instead of designing the services age appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got some very sharp words here. Avri.
Okay, just briefly, and I think I'm going back to where I was. If you've got the ability to do something about capacity building, go do it. And if you've got the ability to support and pay for somebody to do it, start paying.
Wow, they're very good final words. So thank you very much for participating in this session. I hope you really got something out of it. I do hope I gave you the possibility to have your say also. And let's try and work much more closely together as dynamic coalitions. And let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you.